The Forgotten Kingdom DLC brought us 6 new weapons, each of which facilitates their own playstyles, and expands your build options in what is already a pretty wide catalog of choices. Starting off with the first of the 4 long guns, yes, there's no handguns this time around, is Monolith. This sand shooting weapon is very close to the original design of the beam rifle from Remnant 1. It's quite unique in that it is one of 2 weapons added in this DLC that deals generic elemental damage. Firing the beam at a target applies the exposed status effect for 1 second, stacking up to 15 seconds. It's important to note that this is not just a tap 15 times and they'll have 15 seconds of exposed on them. The beam must make contact with a target for more than 1 second to apply the status effect. This means you can't just tap the weapon on a target to reapply their status effect. You do have to consume at least a little ammo to refresh it. Its mod fires out an AoE sandstorm that deals mod and elemental damage. It seeks out a target and then follows them, dealing damage within 5 meters for 15 seconds. This also applies exposed, just like the primary fire. When the target dies, it'll seek out a new one within 10 meters. Probably one of the best aspects of the mod is that you can charge it while it's active, although you can only have one out at a time. The biggest downside of the weapon, in my opinion, is the fairly low base damage and reduced weak spot damage bonus. The base damage isn't as bad because you do have that built-in exposed. You can definitely feel that reduced weak spot damage though. This natural application of exposed opens up a few gear options. For the builds, I went with Hugs, Hunter's Mark and Bulletstorm being my skills. For my trinkets, I grabbed Onyx Pendulum, Token of Favor, Floodlit Diamond, Braided Thorns, and Provisioner Ring. As you can tell, this is supposed to be a swap setup, so I grabbed the Tech 22 for my secondary, with Corrosive Rounds and Sleeper being the mod and mutator. And for Monolith, I went with Momentum. My fragments were crit chance, crit damage, and weak spot damage. Monolith is a very fun weapon. I would say I definitely like this more than the Plasma Cutter. Even if you don't invest into the mod, it's basically just free damage. Since the primary and mod both deal generic elemental damage, sources that increase it are doubly efficient for both halves of the weapon. In this setup, I'm basically using Monolith as a way of boosting the rest of my damage. In a team setup, this is invaluable. This stacks separately from sources like Corrosion. Should you stack both of them, that's 25% more damage from all sources. I didn't even bring up the fact that the Sandstorm mod actually attaches to enemies directly, meaning it's not bound by the ground. You can shoot this at any sort of floating target, and it'll deal damage to them and any ads spawned around them, like with Custodian's Eye. Incredibly good weapon all around. Absolutely worth using on Apocalypse. Up next is Polygun, and man oh man, do I really want to like this weapon. Starting off, the weapon is not explained at all mechanically. I do appreciate the sort of secret, glitchy, computer whatever of the gun. However, it's caused a lot of players to just not know what the hell this weapon even is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It encourages the users to try it out to see what it does. However, this is the only weapon in Remnant 2 that I have gotten multiple comments about asking me to cover it because people just don't know how the hell to use it. I think there's a certain point where you should prioritize player accessibility over cool aesthetics. I know that sounds a little contentious. I only bring it up in this conversation because the weapon just isn't very good. Were it better, I would just hand wave it off as just, a little bit of developer fun. So how in the world does this gun work? Well, it's essentially a DMR shotgun hybrid. It features a unique heat-esque meter that fills up when firing it. When firing at max heat, the weapon will short circuit and deal a small overload blast to the player. It'll also cause the overheat animation to play. This heat mechanic is kinda funky and not in a good way. It does not passively drain and must be removed by the reload mechanic. When you reload, you're given a small skill check. Hitting reload when the arrow is over the zone will remove the built-up heat and increase your next magazine's max heat level for 5 seconds. The size of the zone increases based on your current heat level prior to reloading. This increased heat capacity buff stacks up to 3 times. When performing a successful skill check at 3 stacks, the weapon will gain 5 seconds of unlimited heat, after which the initial 5-second stack timer will resume. Stacks are removed one at a time, taking 15 seconds to fully deplete. Mistiming this skill check or overheating the weapon will remove any accrued stacks. Letting the skill check pass by will drain the weapon's heat but not give a stack. The weapon's mod is 77, 79, 68, which lets you swap to the other firing mode. The shotgun is in the middle of the road as far as damage goes. It fires faster than the Sparkfire, with a little less base damage and obviously no fire dot. The rifle, on the other hand, is on the higher end of the class, being closest to the Huntmaster, but with a much better rate of fire. Thankfully, the weapon card actually updates depending on which weapon type you're currently on. Nice touchgun fire. If only the rest of the weapon were as legible. The most obvious downside of the weapon is the heat mechanic. Doubly so since no sources regarding the mechanic benefit it. This means you'll need to master the skill check minigame if you want to perform well. It also means that sources of fire rate will help you get far more from the weapon than reload speed. The weapon doesn't benefit from reload related sources at all, as a matter of fact. That skill check ain't ever gonna move faster. Another big issue is that your eyes are practically glued to the center of your screen when using it. With enough repetition, you may be able to manually reload by muscle memory instead of relying on sight. However, there are a lot of cases where your muscle memory can be easily thrown off. Say, in the case you lose a stack with an odd percentage of heat. Your brain may tell you that it's safe to fire another shot, but in reality, the next one you do shoot out will shock you with a pitiful amount of damage and leave you twiddling your thumbs for a few seconds. If the weapon passively drained heat when not firing, this would not be an issue. I truly believe the downsides of the weapon outweigh the positives, which there's not really a whole lot of besides infinite ammo and the rifle side being above average. The weapon's punishments of mistiming a skill check, overheating, are just way too harsh. Is there any build that can salvage this thing? The best I could come up with was a build that maximized your fire rate. Alchemist and Gunslinger were my archetypes of choice, with Frenzy Dust and Bulletstorm being my skills. My trinkets being Legacy Protocol, Burden of the Rebel, Braided Thorns, Ring of Infinite Damage, and Anastasia's Inspiration. I chose Nebula as my secondary, in the very likely chance I would need some extra damage. For Polygun's Mutator, I chose Ghost Shell. My plan was to unload the weapon into an enemy's weak spot once I got the infinite heat buff up. When you play perfectly, the weapon is actually not really that bad. However, the likelihood that you'll make a mistake, mess up a skill check, overheat the weapon, it's too likely to really justify using this weapon. Unless you are an absolute god, I would recommend stay far, far away from this one. It needs some serious work. And I'm not talking about just generic stat buffs. As I said, the rifle side is actually pretty above average. The shotgun side could probably be buffed as well, and just let heat rings and trinkets such as Microcompressor or the Ingenuity Mutator affect the weapon. It would go a long way to helping Polygun feel more player-friendly. And just let the weapon passively lose heat. You can keep the reload there. There's no need to remove it. Just let the weapon lose heat. Hell, at that point you have the choice. Do you want to do the reload and get the benefits, or do you just want to have it drain passively? In the hands of a perfect player, yeah, this weapon is absolutely fine for Apocalypse. However, in like 99% of every other player's case, this weapon is just not amazing. Up next is Thorn, and oh boy what a palate cleanser this was to use. Thorn is essentially the weapon that the Root Pan guys fire at you in the Catacombs. It's an auto rifle that fires out homing projectiles. Similar to Enigma, it has an auto aim mechanic. The projectiles are low base damage needles. These needles lodge into enemies and deal explosive damage after 2 seconds. Launching 5 of them at once triggers blowback, and deals double the damage of 5 individual blasts. The mod reloads the weapon, increases reload speed by 25%, fire rate by 15%, and disables automatic blowback for 20 seconds. Activating the mod again before its duration ends detonates the needles, doubling the blast damage. Letting the blast go off on its own deals regular damage, however, it returns some mod power. One non-manually detonated magazine returns about 30% mod power. This means if you stick an enemy with about 100 needles, it's going to give you a full refund. And this gives the weapon kind of a unique choice: automatic detonation for returned mod power, or manual detonation for double mod damage. The needles can hit weak spots, but it's not going to up their damage by any more, realistically. It's also possible for them to hit armored spots, which can really suck. I'd say try to aim away from armored sections of targets, but sometimes with the auto aim it's just not super feasible. This weapon is also something you may or may not want to use in co-op. It's pretty much the ultimate troll weapon, as the blasts are actually way wider than they seem. They don't deal self-damage, but they do deal team damage, and that's not including the stagger, which I believe they have not changed, but if they have, you're still going to be hurting your friends for a lot of damage. Use amplitude and magnifying glass, and your friends will wish you were thrown into the fiery pits of hell.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy them, not join them!
This was my build. Archon Summoner, Magnifying Glass, Blasting Cap Ring, Burden of the Gambler, Anastasia's Inspiration, and Zoe's Ring. For a secondary, I grabbed Corrupted Meridian, just because, you know, more explosives, with Kill Switch on of course. And for Thorn, I decided to run Extender. The way I see it, the more needles you get out, the higher your potential damage. Increased mag size and reload speed help with that quite nicely. For fragments, I chose fire rate, mod damage, and mod cost. Investing into ammo reserves is also really nice, just because, you know, the less you have to have downtime with ammo boxes, the better. I really like this gun. It's super fun. Granted, I'm not on the receiving end of someone using it in co-op. In solo play, it's really good. You could invest into rugged to make your summons not die as quickly when you use it, although I don't even bother with summons in this build, mainly because they're gonna get destroyed even if you have kinship. The sheer volume of explosives guarantees it. The weapon's auto-aim, explosives, and easy-to-use mod make it not only good at single target damage, but also ad clear. With Chakra and Zoe's Ring, you get 50% more mod duration. This allows you to very easily split up your shots between the boss and ads. And since manually detonating the needles doesn't end the mod early, you can spend like 85-90% of the mod getting a bunch of needles in and then dealing a big burst of damage, and then use the remaining duration to get some mod power back via automatic detonation. The weapon practically feeds itself, and is well worth using on Apocalypse. Up next is Trinity Crossbow. It's like the crossbow, but times 3. It's a burst fire crossbow that must be re-notched after every shot. Damage-wise, if you land all 3 bolts, it deals more damage than the base crossbow. This sounds like a straight upgrade, and in some cases it kind of is. However, on swift targets, it's a little harder to land all 3 bolts. Anything that's small and moves frequently must be tracked mid-shot to deal full damage. Besides that, there's really not that much more to the weapon. If you've played with the crossbow before, this is not that much different. The increased mag size and pretty swift reload speed make it basically an upgrade to the crossbow, and everything but manual aiming. For my build, I chose Hunter Explorer, my trinkets being Nightweaver's Grudge, Xania's Malice, Braided Thorns, Atonement Fold, and Ravager's Bargain. For the mod and mutator, I chose Corrosive Rounds and Ghost Shell. Ghost Shell, with the triple shot nature of the Trinity Crossbow, is a perfect fit. I don't really have a whole ton to say about the weapon, it's just pretty good. Its addition to the roster kinda dissuades me from wanting to use the base crossbow ever again, but ever since the base crossbow was buffed a few patches ago, it's in a much better state. Both weapons are worth using in Apocalypse. Moving on to melee, we got 2 really good ones this time around. Good in the sense that they're unique and not just more damage on a hammer moveset or something. Crystal Staff is an honest-to-god wizard catalyst. It features the basic staff moveset, albeit with the charge attack empowering the weapon. For the next 10 seconds, basic attacks shoot out homing shock projectiles. These projectiles can collide with the terrain, however if you just aim into an open area, there's a good chance it'll home into whatever's nearby. The projectiles can also hit weak spots, but also armored spots. Whenever your projectiles hit a target, you gain a stack of Power Stone. When you perform another charged attack, you'll release a small shockwave, and 1 homing shock projectile for every stack of Power Stone. These ones also apply overloaded, dealing 150 shock damage every 5 seconds for 10 seconds. With nothing else boosting it, this weapon is already pretty good. Energy bolts released by the charged melee deal the same direct damage as those fired by the staff while empowered, and are also affected by charge attack buffing sources. Sources of melee attack speed and charge speed quicken the initial empowering animation. It's worth noting that the empowering costs no stamina, but the release does. This was my build: Ritualist and Invoker, Cost of Betrayal, Brawler's Pride, Rally Band, Ahane Crystal, and Dying Ember. For the mutator, I chose Executor. My goal was to pretty much keep up Miasma's duration indefinitely. Since every single projectile would just add 30% more to their durations, yeah, you can see how this would be an unending pain storm for anyone afflicted. You could probably guess from my relic choice and trade investments that I was going for a leech build. Being honest, I really didn't need this much leech. Rally Band on its own is kind of nuts with Crystal Staff. Every single projectile gives you 10% of your gray health back. That, with even a little bit of leech, makes it so you're always going to be topped off on health. If you do plan on using this weapon, I highly recommend investing into sources of melee attack speed. Since you only have 10 seconds of the weapon being empowered, the faster you get out your projectiles and hit your targets, the better. Maybe also invest into recovery. The release does cost a bit of stamina. When spammed back to back, it is seriously taxing. Overall though, I really like Crystal Staff. It's simple, effective, and it can work in a lot of setups. Finally, we have Mirage. The addition of this flail did exactly what I expected it would do. It made the other two flails completely obsolete. There is zero reason to ever use the base ones ever again. When performing the charge attack, Mirage conjures up a sandstorm. This deals damage to those inside of it, and applies exposed on hit for 3 seconds up to 15 seconds. That's pretty much it. It's literally just the flail moveset, but better. I didn't even bother testing to see if Mirage costs more stamina than the other flails. It honestly doesn't matter. The sheer power gain alone makes the other two just not worth using by comparison. The Sandstorm also scales with AoE size increases. Perhaps a certain other sword could also get this same benefit again. Please gunfire. Here's the build: Alchemist Challenger, Magnifying Glass, Bisected Ring, Rally Band, Burden of the Destroyer, and Band of the Fanatic. For the mutator, it's up to you which of these two choices you want to pick. Steadfast gives you damage reduction, complete stagger immunity, and full gray health conversion when charging the melee weapon. This plus Rally Band and Bisected Ring, you will pretty much never die. The only thing that will kill you is something that deals a shit ton of damage. Every single tick of the Sandstorm procs the full 10% gray health heal from Rally Band. If you thought this was already kinda strong with Crystal Staff, this is even more ridiculous. Say you don't want this ultimate tanking ability, then I recommend Shocker. The Sandstorm essentially gives you permanent uptime of Shocker. Although to proc the actual lightning blasts, you will have to physically hit a target with the swinging of the melee weapon. In the right situations, this is absolutely overpowered without a shadow of a doubt. If you're still in need of the stagger reduction, you can just pop a confidence booster. Obviously, this doesn't work in every fight, but when it does work, it's honestly kinda scary. As a final note, it's not really worth investing into melee attack speed in this setup. Melee attack speed does not at all increase the rate at which you either tick the Sandstorm or swing the head of the flail. Just stick to either raw damage or survivability. And obviously, if you do run Steadfast, I would swap off Band of the Fanatic for literally anything else. I was just using it here because the constant uptime of Shocker makes the 30% increased status damage pretty good. There we have it, every current weapon in Remnant 2 Apocalypse tested. I am glad to be finally caught up, although by the time this video comes out, we may or may not be close to some sort of update of any kind. The next video will probably be covering whatever does come out next. I have a couple of ideas in the meantime, but we'll see how much time I have between now and whenever the next update releases. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.